Hello, folks. Welcome back to Reality Check with Arvind Swaminathan. I am Arvind Swaminathan. Today, we're going to discuss something which has puzzled a lot of us for a long time: the Chinese puzzle. What do I mean by the Chinese puzzle? Well, we're trying to figure out what went wrong because early in the 1950s, Nehru had offered Chou-en-Lai equality. And the Chinese Prime Minister came to Delhi with open arms, big smile on his face, big hug, everything seemed to be great. Panchsheel was signed, and it was Hind Chin bye bye. We were brothers. But what went wrong? It is difficult to understand why everything went so chronically wrong, and it didn't take very long. By 1956, I think that was the cutoff point. That's where everything turned upside down. Now, I found many things, little small things that were happening. Now, I was only 15 at the time, but maybe my observation was slightly more heightened than most other people. And I couldn't understand why nobody else had noticed it. Now, we were in London because my father was based there at the time. And one afternoon, I'd gone to a movie. Now, the system there was you had one main movie and a side movie with newsreels and adverts in between. Now, you went in at any time, and when the whole performance had finished to the point where you'd come in, you got up and walked out. There was no fixed timing. Now, I went into one of these, I saw one of the movies, and then something in the newsreel really set me off. Now, what I'd seen was a clip from the Bandung Conference in 1956. China had begun their first step towards coming out of isolation. And this was, I believe, a non-aligned meeting. And of course, Nehru was there. Now, at this meeting, Nehru was trying to introduce Chou-en-Lai to the Committee of Nations. By the way, I hope I've got the pronunciation right. Is it Chou-en-Lai or Zhou-en-Lai? I'm not quite sure. So please don't get upset. Now, in this break between the two movies, I saw a newsreel from this conference, and it made me worry because what I'd seen there was definite annoyance and real anger in the Chinese Prime Minister's eyes, in the sense that he sat up bolt upright, the pencil in his hand snapped, his eyes blazed, and he looked around to see if anybody else had noticed, probably. And then the inscrutable smile came back. Now, once that had happened, it was difficult for anybody else to have noted, because inscrutable means precisely that. It was very difficult to find out what was going on in his mind. But the damage had been done. Nobody asked, really, deep down inside, what caused it? Why did he suddenly do this? Why did the pencil in his hand snap? Because when that snapped, it meant he was really angry. What was the cause? Why did he suddenly get so angry when he looked quite at ease up to that point? Why did nobody ask? And if you don't ask, you don't get any answers. Anyway, I didn't wait for the rest of the movie. I went home and waited for my father to come home, and I told him about this. And he said, look, there are diplomats dealing with all this. They know what they're doing. So don't worry about it. You concentrate on school. But this kept going round and round in my mind for quite a long time. Meanwhile, in between, in 57 and 58, rumblings began on the border, Aksai Chin and such places, culminating in 1962, which was really awful. I mean, relations between India and China were virtually at an end. From Hind Chin Bhai Bhai to open warfare hadn't taken all that long, 6 years. And yet nobody even bothered to try and understand. Nobody had observed this snapping of the pencil in his hands. This you see in movies all the time. When you see a criminal is confronted with something, he has a smile on his face, but the glass in his hand crumbles. It tells you he's angry. But why? There was no way I could correlate to what was happening. It wasn't until 1970 that we were at lunch in a friend of my father's place, a friend who happened to be there at Bandung at the time. And he said Nehru had this annoying way of patronizing people, as if he knew it all and everybody should just follow what he said. And he said Chou-en-Lai at that meeting, or Zhou-en-Lai, was really angry over something or other, possibly because of this patronizing approach. And he said the same thing. He said the pencil in his hand snapped, his eyes blazed, and he looked round there to see if anybody else had noticed. Now, this had been my reaction in 1956. That is why my ears sort of pricked up and I took note. And that's when I realized it's not just what he said. It's not just the way he said it, but also what he said, which was really important. Now, this particular snapping, pencil snapping, happened in the middle of his famous younger brother speech, where he looked on Zhou-en-Lai as the younger brother in this partnership. Now, the whole world said, what an orator Nehru is, what a wonderful speech, and so on, except Zhou-en-Lai. He was furious. Why was he furious? Well, the answer to that is if you read any of Pearl S. Buck's old books on old China, you'll realize it is said that in old China or traditional China, it was better to be born a dog or a beggar or anything, but never be born younger brother. So you see, without realizing it, Nehru, instead of welcoming somebody, had hurled possibly the worst insult possible at the Chinese Prime Minister. And because he was there as the Prime Minister of China, he was China. And the insult had come from the Prime Minister of India. So it was from all of India. This is probably the way he took it, which is why he was so furious. Now the problem is, if he had taken Nehru to one side and demanded an explanation, the whole thing could have been cleared up. But he didn't. And that silence made everything even worse, culminating in 1962. In 1962, the Chinese forces in the eastern part of the conflict had poured into what is now Arunachal Pradesh, and then, without any explanation, just decided to go back. They relinquished everything and went back to their interpretation of the McMahon Line. Whether this was because they had gone too far too quickly, logistics were a problem, or whether Kennedy had started helping India and bringing in American supplies, even American aircraft and American pilots, which he did not want to, and of course he didn't want to engage the US. But a bigger problem arose because not only was this insult taken and noted, but the next point emanating from that was that Nehru had offered equality. Panchsheel had been signed. And what is the first principle of Panchsheel? Equality. So a man who says equality but means younger brother, how can you trust such a person? And because he is the Prime Minister of India, how can you trust India? That seems to be what really sparked Chou-en-Lai off. And to this day, we have not been able to resolve the issue. The Chinese have always been a very enigmatic people. They seldom say anything. And whether it's fortunate or unfortunate for the rest of the world, they will think about a particular subject 1,001 times and then not make any comment. So we never know what they're thinking. We don't even know how their thought processes work. Now, this can be illustrated by one of the jokes which was doing the rounds at the time. There's a very distressed looking Chinese diplomat pacing the pavement in London. And bless his heart, a London policeman goes up to him and says, "Excuse me, sir, may I help you? Are you lost?" The answer to that from the Chinese diplomat was absolute shock. And he says, "I hear, hotel lost." Now, on the face of it, it appears the joke is on the Chinese diplomat, who apparently has no knowledge of English. But is it? Is the joke on the Chinese diplomat or the London policeman? Now, the reason I say it is this. Most of us would think, obviously, the diplomat is lost. That's why he's pacing around getting more and more agitated. But what is his way of looking at the same problem? You see, to his logical mind, and it is logical, first, somebody or some people have to be looking for him. And if on not being able to find him, then he could be declared as lost, or whatever they were looking for. Only then could they say this article or object or he was lost. However, nobody was looking for him. So how could he be lost? But he was looking for the hotel. Not being able to find it, it was the hotel which was lost. So why does this London policeman ask him, "Are you lost, sir?" I mean, it should be perfectly obvious. We are speaking English. Or at least I think he is speaking English. This is a problem of perception. How does one look at any particular situation? The London policeman or the Chinese diplomat? If you look at it, they're both right in their own ways. And yet, they could also both be wrong. Maybe I can illustrate this with something which happened to me a long time ago. Now, I happened to be in Canada at the time. And this is where perception comes in. Not just perception, but also vocabulary. Now, in a small town in Canada, to relieve tension or things like this in my mind, I used to do a lot of loose sketching. Now, I went into a stationery shop, got myself a pad and a couple of pencils, and this smart looking sales lady, I found out later she was one of the owners of that shop, came up to me with a big smile and said, "Excuse me, sir, may I help you?" I said, yes, please. Could I have a rubber, please? Now, I couldn't understand this, but that smile turned into a virtual snarl when she said, "We don't sell those here." And I was taken aback because what had I said to make her so angry? And I thought, oh, maybe she doesn't like a dark-skinned person. Then I reached across and said, "This is all I wanted. Why are you getting so upset?" And she says, "That is an eraser." Now, I ran out from that shop very quickly after buying my purchases. And a couple of days later, somebody else whom I'd got to know in that town looked across the street, saw her, and said, "Come along, I want you to meet somebody. He's a very useful person to know. I sort of dragged him back inside and I explained to him what had happened. He looked at me and he said, I think you deserve or you need badly and very quickly a course in Canadian. And he said, why? What happened? Why did she get so upset? He said, what you wanted was an eraser, which is what you came out with. You know what you asked her for? I said, no. He said, what you asked her for was a condom. How does one look at these things? Because you may say something, but it means something totally different to the listener. Problem is, how do you say something which the other person understands the way you want it understood? There's only one way to do that. Explain in detail. Because if you don't, you may say one thing and he understands something else. Also, in case something need not be said, don't say it. Because the more you say, the more scope there is for total and absolute misunderstanding. Nehru was very fond of speeches, and everyone said he was a great orator. Here's one particular place where everything went totally pear-shaped. There was no way that he could have thought or even imagined that the Chinese Prime Minister would take it in any other way except that which he meant. And it is necessary to understand what you said and what the other person has understood. So if you say something, please explain it in full detail so that there is no misunderstanding. The other person or the listener doesn't take it in any other way except that which you mean. We have to understand that relationships and relations, well, it doesn't take very much for them to go sour. Always explain whatever it is in detail if necessary to make sure that the other person understands exactly what you want them to understand, rather than you say one thing and he understands something else and puts his own totally different interpretation to what you were trying to say in the first place. This whole misunderstanding could have been sorted out within minutes if the Chinese Prime Minister had simply taken Nehru to one side and said, what do you mean by this? This is what I understand. What did you mean? I mean, did you mean I'm younger brother and I should do precisely what you say? Or was there some other way of looking at it? This whole matter could have been sorted out within minutes. So both were right and both were wrong. So I don't understand why we can't get together and sort it out amicably so that we can move on from there. Well, folks, I hope you liked our little discussion today. If you did like it, please press the like button and subscribe to this channel, Reality Check with Arvind Swaminathan. Share it with all your friends, relatives, and your groups. Thank you. See you next time.